What I've actually done here is taken the chess set that appears in Lucas van Leyden's painting, painted about 500 years ago, and recreated it into a chess set almost exactly like the one that appears in that painting. Now this chess set hasn't been seen for 500 years, so it's a bit of a task. It's involved a lot of research, it's involved a lot of time, and I'd like to make this video interesting for people who are just learning about this for the first time, but also something of substance for people who know something about this history and will be interested to see that after all this time, this is the first instance of this chess set actually being analyzed and recreated after 500 years. This painting was painted by Lucas van Leyden. It's actually this size that you see right here. Not a large painting, but very rich in detail. Lucas van Leyden was one of the greatest engravers of the Renaissance, and this painting was possibly painted when he was only 14 years old. It's hard to believe. He's a very precocious painter. Some people have said, well, maybe he was a little older, maybe he was 19 or something, but in truth, it's an incredible feat for any type of a young painter to paint in such detail and such refinement of technique. This painting is certainly one of the most famous chess paintings ever uncovered. It appears in just about any chess book about chess history, about chess as it appears in great works of art. You'll find many. Here's one where it's actually a little bit larger than the original in this reproduction in this book here. It's another famous chess history book, and the most famous chess history book of all, Murray's. Here we have it. This is certainly a painting to be reckoned with, and yet there's no evidence out of all these things of anybody actually looking at that position on the board, looking carefully at those chess pieces and figuring it out exactly who they are. Here's a book by R.C. Bell where there's a little sketch of some of the pieces, and when you see the pieces more closely you'll realize these sketches are not too accurate, but at least there's some attempt there. Notice though that he doesn't say what he thinks the pieces probably are. So let's look at the source material here. This is a facsimile from Silenus. It was published in 1616, so that's a little more than 100 years after this painting was made. However, this form of chess, known as Courier chess, was known to have existed for about 600 years, although information about it is scant throughout history. A journal here or there mentions there was this unusual form of chess played on a 8x12 board. It mentions something about the pieces, but finally in 1616 Gustav Silenus wrote the details about how the game is actually played. Here's a picture of a board that he encountered in those days, and it's actually kind of compressed so that it's square, although there are 12 squares, now rectangles, this way and 8 this way. So it's an 8x12 board, but compressed to fit into a square shape, and it tells exactly where each of the pieces was placed and all that. There's even some pictures of a set from those days, but they're very detailed pictures, very different from the pieces in van Leyden's painting, which is more symbolic pieces, iconic, like the pieces of chess that we use today. This is a fancy set, so very few clues as to the identities of the pieces that we have to contend with in van Leyden's painting. A lot of detail, though, about how the game was played. So we know pretty well how this game was played. And just as another bit of information historically, this is a little pamphlet from 1990 from Strobeck, Germany, the last place that this form of chess was known to exist. And there's a little picture of a chessboard that was granted to them in 1651. That's a few years after the rules were given in Silenus' account. Somebody donated a chessboard to the city of Strobeck with a little inscription in 1651. So, a little information here, a little information there. let's see what we can make out of the painting. We're going to look very closely at this painting. We're going to see where the pieces are, knowing how the game was played, where the pieces were originally set up, how they could move, knowing something about the game of chess, understanding what makes a logical position and what makes an impossible position. We're going to determine whether this is a possible position, and if so, what the pieces can possibly be. And the fact that we can find out what the pieces could possibly be gives us our greatest evidence that it is a true position, because if you just take pieces and scatter them around the chessboard, even with some knowledge of the game, and somebody analyzing the picture very soon will see that it's a senseless arrangement that you've made. So, is this a sensible arrangement? Is this an actual game in progress? Could it be a game in progress? Let's see what we can find out. We take each piece and remove it from the painting. Just say, okay, here is what our evidence is. We have these pieces. Some of them are similar to others, as you see here. A bunch of pawns. Pawns are obvious, okay? There's a whole bunch of them. They're small. We're not going to have any question about who's a pawn or what they look like. Everything else we have a question about. When you first see this, you're probably going to think these are probably the king. They look like an iconic picture of a king that we have nowadays in our symbology. But that symbology did not exist in 1508 when this painting was made. Let's go on and see what the possibilities are. Oh yes, once we get them taken out of the painting, we're going to blow them up to the actual size that they probably would be. How do we do that? Well, in the original painting we have a hand giving us the size of a lady's hand. So if we judge from that, the pieces are rather small, and we can figure that these squares come to about 1.5 inches. Blowing everything up proportionally, we get this information. Each one of these images of a piece blown up proportionally. And here they are. So we know now about what size they are. Now, perspective in that painting was not exact, but it was well attended to. So we have a good general idea of what the pieces looked like and what size they were. Now, here's a little early speculation on what they might have been. Maybe this was the king, since it looks like a king. Maybe that's a queen because it's like the king but smaller. Maybe that's a bishop or the courier piece. Let's see, D, what was I suggesting that might be? Doesn't really matter. The point is that I wanted to line these all up and see kind of how they were related a little bit to begin with. But to really look at what's going on here, we have to look at the actual position. So here's all those pieces, just given an arbitrary letter, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way up to T. And then here they are laid out as they are in the picture, laid out on the board. This is from the perspective of the person playing black. That's the lady's hand here. This is her side of the board. This is black side of the board. And these pieces all lined up, have been captured, are very nicely laid out for us. And you'll notice that van Leyden really took a lot of care to show us each piece. So much care was taken to show this set. It behooves us to see what he was showing us, and that's what we're doing here. So on the side of the board here we have all these pieces, and here they are with our letters that we arbitrarily gave them as we're analyzing which piece is which piece. Now we're going to take each one of those pieces and imagine if one thing is one thing, then another thing can be another thing. So if this is the king and this is the queen, then this might be the king's assistant, the sage we call him. He was originally called the man. This might be the queen's assistant, the jester. This might be the courier, the piece that the game was named after. This might be the medieval bishop, and so on. And then here's the black pieces lined up there. We don't see these pieces on the board, but we see this and this and this. And so then continuing, this might be the knight. And so if that is the original array, well, does it make sense on the board? The answer is no, because if this is the king and she's moving a black piece here, well, that doesn't make sense, because this piece, whatever it is being threatened by this pawn. So she'd be moving another piece while her king is in check, and that just wouldn't make sense. So, you know, if this is a true position, that can't be the king. So we go through another permutation, and with, if these pieces are this, then these pieces are this, they're all lined up. Does this make sense? Well, no, because she's moving a piece and it couldn't, this one, the one that's in her fingers, she's moving, and it couldn't be a bishop, because a bishop, the medieval bishop, could not have gotten to that square. It's a very limited piece and it just couldn't have gotten there. So we go through another. Finally we get close to our final conclusion. Still not certain about these pieces, but we finally concluded that because of the position on the board, this is probably the queen, this is probably the king's man, the sage. So here's our final position as we see it. All of those 10 temporary letters have been replaced by the actual meaning of the piece. Black bishop, black knight, black jester, black rook, and so on. All these pieces are shown. The little yellow and black dots are pawns. There's no question about those. Here's the position. Here's the position analyzed. Here's pieces that are not showing, and it makes very good sense that these white pieces could be concealed by this big fluffy part of her clothing there, that big white thing that puffs out of people's sleeves in the old days. So here's what we've got. Now we're looking back at our pieces here. We've got our lineup of rooks, got our lineup of kings and queens. We take a good example out of each one, and actually, this is tracing paper, actually traced from those actual size, or blown up to real playing size pieces, just tracings. For future use, we've taken those tracings and made them more defined and shaded them a little bit so they look sort of like sketches taken out of the painting. And now we need to define them, because we're actually going to make these pieces as much like the ones that appear in the painting as possible. So we're taking this image and defining it so that we can actually take measurements from it. We can actually say exactly what the basic shape is, the cross-section is of each piece, based entirely on the painting, but made definite in a geometric form as we begin to work the pieces. There's one more step though. We want to see what they all look like lined up together. So this is what they're going to look like in their starting array, with little pawns stuck on the side. And we're not entirely happy with the layout. The queen is a bit too big for the king. This guy's a little bit too big, even though he's considered an important piece. And just knowing chess pieces, knowing the meaning of the pieces, and considering that Van Leyden's painting is not entirely true perspective, but general perspective, we're going to use our sense and just adjust things a little bit. So the king and queen, a little bit more the proportions that we want for a complete set that works in harmony and shows what it is. And then finally, here's our initial setup. So that's all preliminary work. The big project after that is making it. Here's our material to make it with. We've got the actual pictures from the painting, and we've got our abstracted sketch, and then we've got this sort of redefined geometric detail of each piece. And so as I began working, this is what I used. Clay, Sculpey. It's not easy to make very geometrical pieces out of something like this, but it takes time, and there are techniques for doing it. Using that, always going back to the original shape shown in the painting, we finally come up with sculpted pieces. Now here's the rook. This guy here, he's just in a shadow here, but enough of a form to give us a very good idea. We make him symmetrical. This picture I first made him completely round here, but then decided he's a little more tapered here, so the final piece comes out like this, a little tapered in his body, very much the shape of the piece that was originally painted 500 years ago. And then there's basing added onto it. I took these sculpted pieces to a fellow who casts in resin out in California, and he took my sculpted pieces and made them into molds which were used, and most of the sculpted pieces were broken in the mold making process, but that's okay because we got good molds from them. Now back from him I get these just pieces. They're kind of rough, they're not finished on the outside, the bottom needs to be sanded, so finally when I get those, this is what I do. I color them on the outside, I sand the bottom so that they stand straight, put on felt on each one, and one more side, the board. In order to get the board like the original painting, we have to say, what was it? Probably painted squares, probably made from a common wood in that part of the world. So I got a piece of imported German beechwood, which is more than likely as anything else what was used in those days to make this board itself. I painted it by hand so that it would have this hand-painted appearance. Then I had it photographically reproduced and set it up on my computer with details of framing so that it would look just like the board from his original. Once I had that set up entirely on an image file, I had it sent to a printer who printed it on this adhesive page with a durable cover. This printer happens to do board games, so I trusted them to give me a good durable cover, adhesive back. This goes onto a solid board, and as you see here, there's your game all set up just like it is in the painting. From about this angle, the woman is handling this piece, putting it down. She is putting the king into check. It is protected by this piece, which is a courier, moves like our modern bishop. She is, now if this moved like a modern queen, interestingly enough, it would be checkmate, but this piece only moves one space diagonally. So this fellow here will probably move over to the side, and she'll probably take his pawn, and who knows where it'll go from there, but she has an overwhelming majority of force here, and it's only a matter of time before he gets checkmated. You see she is very studied and careful in her work, and he's just kind of losing it. I think he's had too much to drink. So there's our set, all done and ready for play. About 40 of these have been made so far since they first started at the end of 2008. That just happened to be the 500-year anniversary of the painting itself. Of course, I set up a rule booklet with this. There's all the rules with details using those sketches that I showed you earlier to refer to the pieces, the setup, and even shows you those pictures from Silenus's 1616 account, which are a different style from the ones we have here. One further evolution of this, these pieces are made of resin, which is commonly known as plastic, but of course they're handcrafted and very well made and detailed. However, I've got another fellow who works in bronze, and from those pieces, giving it more, a little more symmetrical precision, and working the pieces according to these, he has reproduced this set in solid bronze. It's a very nice set for the collector who has everything. He doesn't have this one yet because this is the first time this has existed in 500 years. And the poster. So that's basically it. I'm Rick, and I welcome you to go to courierchess.com or to ancientchess.com. Learn more about this. Contact me anytime. And I appreciate you taking the time to learn about just how we made Courier Chess live again.